All right, seeing none, let's move into the annual audit, and I'll ask our auditor to please step up.
Paul, if you could come on up. The audit was available in the resources section of Board Book. We sent that out on October 16th. Evans Marshall Pease completed the, Marshall, did I say that right?
Marshall and Pease, yes, sir.
Completed our annual audit. Again, that's required by the state. Tim, do you have any other introductions?
No, just that Paul's firm also does the audit for the Township Treasurer's Office, but I don't think that's been completed yet, or if it is, it's just recently.
Actually, the audit has been completed. The draft copy for approval by their board has been sent to them. It was sent out on Friday. They had not received it because there was no mail yesterday. I assume they got it today. And I expect that the audit report should be available for distribution to the districts before this week is over.
Yeah, and I've talked to George Shrimpus, the Chief Financial Officer at the Treasurer's Office, and as soon as he gets it, he'll give me a copy and I'll distribute it to the board members.
Paul, if you could provide us a summary of the audit, and then I know you received several questions from a board member that we forwarded to you yesterday from a board member. I don't know how much of those you can answer tonight, or if you need to supply the other answers in writing. But I know there were a few questions from a board member that we'll need to address after your summary.
Okay. There were quite a few questions that came. I just got them. I will, as I did last year, respond in writing so that the board has the response in front of them. I'd like to start by saying that some of the questions that were raised is because of the profession has adopted what are called clarity standards. They call them that, I'm not sure I do, but they do. It has resulted in a change in the format of the report itself, because one of the questions that was raised was, why is the independent auditor's report look different this year than it has in the last couple of years? That is one product of the clarity standards. Other parts within the notes, the financial statements, and in the exhibits are again a result of that. But I will attempt to answer all of the questions that were raised in a separate document, and I will try to get that done this week, so before your next meeting you can have your answers to it. In terms of the audit itself, the audit went, as it has in the last 2 years, very, very well. There were no problems as far as the audit itself is concerned. The financial report, I kind of think, stands on its own merit. The study of the questions raised as to what do we as auditors do in terms of internal control. And without giving you a lesson in accounting, what an auditing firm will do to evaluate the internal control of any client is to first determine what the controls are that are in place. And they will do that by interview process, and also by what is something that's called a walkthrough, so that for various procedures, we will actually follow a transaction or a series of transactions through the process to see that the controls are being followed. We also do what is called a risk assessment. There is a series of questions that we have to answer within our own working papers, and with those answers we can then determine if, based on our study and evaluation, if the client is a low-risk auditee, if the controls are in place. Obviously, to the extent that the controls work as they should, we don't have to do as much work. If we find there are weaknesses, that we may have to expand our procedures to satisfy ourselves that the controls are in place, and that if there are any errors, that they are reduced to a minimum. We have not, over the last 3 years, really found any material errors of any kind, but each year we do do this internal control study. We send out questionnaires. I believe we sent some to the board this year. We have also in the past sent them to other members of your staff in the business office to determine what their thoughts are as to the fairness of the accounting procedure, whether there are any problems that they're aware of. And the reason that we use that is that it is a way which we hope will allow the various recipients of these questionnaires to be frank and honest with the auditors. They come back to us. They do not go back through the normal chain of command within the office. And that allows us to hopefully get some honest insight from the various employees of the district. I hope that kind of answers the general idea of what internal control does. As stated, because of the internal controls and the fact that they work as well as they do, and keep in mind, as Tim said, we also have the privilege of auditing the township school treasurer, so we kind of see the district from both sides of the equation, not only from the input data that comes within the District 208 itself, but also how it is handled at the township school treasurer's level as well and reported back. Without getting into too much detail, the internal controls of the township school treasurer's office are evaluated as they are here. And we have been there now 6 years, and thank goodness we have not found any problems. I read the article that somebody sent me on the Lyons Township School Treasurer. I don't think I can speak to that other than the fact that they did not have such things as budgets and accountability. I'm not exactly sure what the board was doing. I'm not sure if they had an independent audit or what that was showing, but I want to stay away from that because I'm not doing that job. But I can speak to the township school treasurer here at Proviso Township and the controls over the things that it handles are adequate. They function properly. For those of you who may not know what a township school treasurer does, simply he is the duly authorized custodian of all monies of the district. He receives all taxes, both real estate and personal property replacement taxes. He receives all state and federal funds, and through his accounting records then distributes them to the appropriate district to which they belong. We test those almost 100% through third-party confirmation. Excuse me. So we know that the monies that are reported to any particular district in terms of real estate taxes, state monies, federal monies are accurate, and they are in fact, the third-party confirmation actually comes through the Illinois State Board of Ed, through their FRIS reports. So I can tell you that without any fear of reservation, that the internal control structure as it pertains to District 208, both within and without, are more than adequate. The financial statements that you receive from the township school treasurer, the only difference between that and your audited report is the township school treasurer reports monthly to the districts on a cash basis only. The financial audit that you have here is on the accrual basis, and I think I don't need to explain the difference between the two, I hope. But the information from which this audit is based, which basically comes through the district here, we have audited it, and we feel that the presentation is correct.
Paul, there was
I think
some,
I've kind of killed it, but go ahead.
there were some questions that are, it was looking for a general question, but on October 23rd that Tim forwarded in regards to the internal controls and what was in the proposal, if I'm not mistaken, Mr.
Yeah,
Walsh.
let me ask it, because I asked it, well, let me ask a couple of things. Whether you you can opine and you can't, and somebody did an audit, we obviously have a duty to make sure our financial records are appropriate. In fact, we have 4 different policies that address that we're supposed to make sure our records are audited. And one of them gives a specific duty for the board and administration to make sure on an annual basis an audit is performed of our internal controls. When we hired you to do the work in your proposal, you said that you were going to do that your procedure will include review, analysis, and documentation, design, and operation of the internal control structure.
Yes.
But everywhere you've mentioned, and I've read other audit reports, so I'm not faulting your firm, they all qualify everything they can in the hopes they won't get sued
Yeah,
after the fact.
the wording is somewhat boilerplate.
So, but everywhere you talk about doing internal controls, you specifically state you did not look close enough to find out if we had good internal controls.
Okay.
So I'm trying to find out twofold. One is, when we hired you, again, based on your proposal, I had the impression we were going to have knowledge of whether our internal controls were appropriate, et cetera. But that is not what we say in the audit report. And we need to know that to see if there's a gap between us thinking we can rely on your audit report to determine whether our internal controls are appropriate, or whether we're not following our policy and have to take some additional step to do a separate evaluation of our internal controls.
I understand your question. I think, number one, in the proposal where we talk about the things that we will do, we are talking of the procedures that we as auditors will follow. There is not unless a CPA firm is engaged specifically to report on internal controls, which we are not, it is only a part of ours. There is no report that says, yes, we've looked at all of your internal controls, and yes, every one of them works, and it gets into detail. That is not the purpose of a financial audit.
So you can understand, and I don't fault the administration or any current or former board member, we do have some CPAs, but that's not really their job. And if you read the proposal, or if to the extent you read the report and you're not paying a lot of attention to all the qualifications, there's some idea that there's a comfort that we actually, our annual audit has given us some comfort that we have good internal controls, but that may or may not be true, right?
I'll always say, and let me get to it, in the report on internal control over financial reporting, et cetera,
Well,
we say that the purpose of the report is solely to describe the scope of our testing of internal control and compliance and the results of that testing, and not to provide an opinion on the effectiveness of the entity's internal control or on compliance. To do that would be almost a separate engagement.
So I guess I'm asking for your professional opinion. If we have a duty under our policy, and you don't need to know, it says, let's just assume for a second I'm accurate, that we have a duty to annually assure that our internal controls are proper, we really can't rely on your audit as this basis for that determination.
If you're looking for absolute assurance, you are correct. Okay, but I think you can take some comfort in that, and now this is our third engagement here for the district, that we are constantly over the period reviewing the internal control structure on a periodic basis. We not only rely on what we've seen in the past, but we need to assure ourselves that the controls that we have seen before are still working.
Well, can you just go dive into that one more bit, and then I'm done asking questions on it? And that is, how do you know what our internal controls are? Do we have a manual that's again, I work for a corporation. We have SOX requirements. Every control is documented, and you also have to report to make sure you meet the requirements on the SOX control, which might be just sending somebody a letter or
Well,
whatever.
basically, I think from a CPA's perspective, there is much literature on what we need to do in terms of evaluating risk, evaluating internal control from an auditor's standpoint. And those are the things that we follow. That is our written documentation that says, here's what you should be doing, here's what you, and we have, in addition to what you see in the audit report, as you may or may not know, every 3 years, because we are so heavily involved in the municipal environment, we need to have what's called a peer review. And that is that once every 3 years, our firm, like every other CPA firm that's in the municipal arena, has to have a peer review done by an outside CPA who meets the requirement of our profession to do these peer reviews. His job is to review at random. He'll pick and choose whatever, without our knowledge, he'll come in and say, these are the audits I want to look at. And he will review all of our working papers. He will see that our checklists are there. He is, again, another linchpin that we are doing what we need to do. For instance, for each area that we audit, we have certain checklists that we need to, that are part of our audit procedures, where we answer certain questions, yes and no, and what the answers are, or explain them, so that the peer reviewer can look at this and know that this particular CPA firm has done sufficient work to render its opinion.
I was asking on the other side, though, you audit a lot of firms. I mean, do we have written procedures that you're able to look at and say, here's our process for this control? Or do you just ask our staff questions?
Well, on a new client such as you were 3 years ago, basically a lot of it is through the interview process.
Okay.
And in addition to that, we also interviewed our predecessor to find out if they ever had any problems. There are.
No, you're missing my point
No,
completely.
okay.
I'm not challenging
No.
your. I want to know is, do we have written controls that we hand you and say, here's our control, and then you read them and ask people whether we follow them, or do you just, is it all oral? That's what I'm trying to find out.
I think the latter.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have any written, no.
You audit a lot of school districts. Is
About
it
28.
Is it typical that most of them, 28, just have oral controls, or do they also have written controls?
Very few of them have a manual, so to speak.
Okay.
But again, when you, and I hate to sound like I'm bragging, but when you do as many as we do, and especially in the school district arena, the controls that we need to see are pretty much uniform district to district. There are things we need to look for, and are they in place and are they being done? There may be some nuances and some variations. Every school gets real estate taxes. They all pay bills. They all have bonds, or at least most of them have. We kind of know from our experience what kind of internal control structure we should find for each of these particular areas. And that's what we look for, and seeing if those controls are being followed. And a lot of it involves approvals at various levels. We look to see if that's there. For instance, in the area of purchasing, is there a purchase order? Who approves it? When it is paid, is there a receiving report that the items ordered are received? Does it get into the accounts payable properly? Is it paid properly? That's just one little area that we look at. I mean, it expands across the whole gamut of the operation of a district.
Okay.
But there are, in terms of a manual, which you probably are more used to, more structured, no.
Okay.
As far as you go, though, the check sheets that you're referring to usually come in a binder. And these check sheets are multiple pages filled with multiple questions
Yes.
that either apply to what you're doing in that particular audit situation, or they don't apply.
That is correct.
So you could go down and have to answer 300 to 500 questions easily when you're doing this audit, because this check sheet that you have is there as your guide to make sure that you cover everything from A to Z.
Yes.
Whether it applies or not, you have to go down
Yeah,
and complete that check sheet, okay?
Right.
That becomes part of your work papers. And then when you're done, the peer review process, the Illinois CPA Society assigns someone, contacts your firm, and then your firm has to disclose, we do these 30 municipal audits in this category, we do this category, we do this category, and then they choose which one of those schools they're gonna review.
Yes.
And then they go in and look at your work papers and your interview notes and your check sheets, and they go through probably a more detailed review of your work papers than the amount of detail you review on the school's work papers, I would fair to say.
Very close. Peer review is a lengthy process, and what they are concerned with is that we are performing enough work that when we put our name on the opinion letter, that we have done sufficient work to back it up. And we need, this is done every 3 years, we have to pass. If we don't pass, they can stop us from doing school audits, or any other kind of audit for that matter. If we're not doing our job right, we're out of Schlitz.
Yeah, but if you do your job right, 100% right, and they do what they said and give you the greatest rating in the world, and we find out a year from now there was some problem with our internal controls and there was fraud and there was some money missing, you have no, you've told us that you didn't check for that when you did the audit, right?
Again, I think, Mr. Walsh, the answer simply is that, again, if what the board wants is a detailed internal.
No, I don't want you to say,
I
I want to say, just based on what you did, forget about what we could do. But with all of those things, Mike's explanation, your explanation, at the end of the day, if we actually do have a weakness somewhere in our internal controls, you might not have caught it, and we could still have some
Yes,
liability.
it can happen.
Okay, that's,
It can happen.
So when you're testing and when you said about the expenditure, you look for a purchase order. You're not going out to the person who signed off on the purchase order and asking them, is this your signature and did you do this? And when you go in and look for the approval, you know, you might be interviewing him and be familiar with his signature if he's the approver. But when you go out and look at the receipt that says we received some kind of product for that money, you're not going out on all those occasions and contacting a third party to make sure that there's actually a company out there that actually provides these type of materials or services. I mean, you're not doing that type of fraud check.
No, you're right. But in defense of that, probably 70 to 80% of the types of things, the types of hard goods that are ordered by a school district, they're all from the same place.
Right, and you're
I mean,
very,
the names are legion. I mean, they're all, you see them all the time.
right, and you're familiar with that because you're doing all the audits.
Yes.
And if you
Yes.
had saw something out of the ordinary, perhaps that would be a test check that you would go after.
If we see it's known to happen that we'll see a vendor that we haven't seen before, and we will look into it to see that it is a legitimate vendor, that they're on a vendor list, that they are approved. Again, we look for the exceptions rather than, you know, it's like the doctors say, think horses, not zebras. If something is looks out of line, we're going to check it because it's not what we're used to seeing. So if a vendor shows up, I'll give you another area, and we do this in a number of the districts. In the case of teachers, we'll take a handful of the teachers and we'll go into the personnel department and we will pull their files. I want to see that they've been approved by the board. I want to see that their salary is up to scale, it's on the right level, those kinds of things. I want to make sure that I haven't got a ghost. Now, could I have a ghost? You betcha. Am I going to check 1,600 teachers? Probably not. But I want at least them to know, don't forget, to some extent, an audit is psychological. That the client knows that somebody's looking at them and looking at what they're doing. So the fact that I may pick out a half a dozen teachers, they don't know who I'm picking, but the fact that they know that I am picking it and looking to see that everything, their hire is correct, that their pay scale is appropriate to their degree, et cetera, they at least know something's being done. And we hope that that's somewhat of a deterrent against the ghost payroll. there's only one real effective way to audit a payroll. And that is you take the payroll and you hand it out yourself, and every person that gets paid signs right in front of you and has ID. That's the only way you audit for a ghost. Nobody's ever wanted that done, but it can be done.
The 1,600 teachers, is that testing at the township level?
I'm sorry?
The 1,600 teachers you said you tested, is that at the township level?
We audit, within the township, we do 5 of the schools within the Proviso Township School Treasurer's Office. And we do check certain teachers in the various districts.
Because that wouldn't be our district, because we'd have the ultimate one-on-one. We'd have a teacher for every student.
Yeah, yeah, you were right, you're right.
Are there any other highlights, George, that you want to provide in
I think the rest of
summary
it
the
kind of
audit?
stands on its own. The results of operations are there. Are there any questions since you've had a chance to review the report?
I just, again, we're in the year where we're pulling back the August tax revenue receipts into the current year.
Yes.
And we have two receipts during the year. Unlike in the very first time this happened, we either had 1 or 3.
Right.
So,
And I remember saying when I was here last year
right,
that the fact that it was on time would probably never happen again, and they made a liar out of me. It appears that the county of Cook has finally got their act together, and the taxes are going to be coming on a regular basis, both March and August.
okay. And so then that would affect us when?
It
90
affected you
days-
this year. And
90 days after the close of the year, if the taxes aren't collected, that would be an October 1st date if I'm doing my math right. So all of July, all of August, all of September. So approximately,
Well,
if taxes are collected in October, you're not going to pull it back.
No.
So if we
no.
get it,
We pulled back only 60 days.
60 days. So if we get any type of payment or any type of due date after September 1st, we're going to have an audit report that shows we had half the revenue that we actually had.
And one of the things that I thought I would see and didn't is that if you look at the various revenue and expenditure reports, you will see that the revenue from real estate taxes in the prior year is higher than it is this year. And that's because in the prior year you had the 3, and this year you only have the 2.
Right.
And hopefully that will continue that way, so there'll be no more violent swings like that if they stay on track.
Because you do the township treasurer's audit and you do our audit, my understanding is our people type in the computer bills to pay. And that is linked to the township computer where checks are printed and mailed out to the vendors.
One of his duties is to, again, like I was saying, he receives all monies. He also pays out monies based on the orders of the specific boards of education. Each board of education prepares what we refer to as a list of bills to be paid. And based upon that, which we assume has passed muster with the board or has at least been approved by a finance committee, the township school treasurer will then issue the checks.
Shortly tonight, we're going to approve a list of bills for the township to mail out those checks. So can somebody at the township treasurer's office enter a bill to be paid by us? Is there a segregation of duty there where somebody at the township office can process a bill to be paid from our money?
Could it happen?
Does the computer
Maybe.
Does the computer allow that to happen?
I'm not sure the computer's got enough checks in it, but one thing we do, and we test on the various districts within the township school treasurer, we will, for each district, select randomly a list of bills to be paid and trace that to the disbursements actually made by the township school treasurer to see that they are being paid in accordance with those lists of bills. Now, we don't check them all.
No, you can't.
So your question is, could it happen? Potentially. Have we ever found it to happen over the 6 years we've been there? No.
That's good.
And unlike the article I saw from the Lyons Township situation, every year, the Proviso Township Board or Treasurer's Office passes a budget, and stay within those budgets. We present as part of our audit a comparison of the expenditures they actually make versus their budget. And they are very conscientious as to stay within that budget.
So as far as the payroll goes at the treasurer's office, that we input here into the computer, and it's electronically transmitted over to
Yes.
the treasurer's office, and the treasurer's office processes all our payroll, and they produce a payroll check,
Yes,
and they do the proper withholding based on, again, information that we put into the computer based
is
on their
correct.
filing status and their dependents and that type of thing. And then a check is produced, and how does our faculty and staff get their pay? Is it mailed out from the township, or do we
I
handle
believe
it?
it's returned to the district.
We pick up the checks at the
Yeah, they
treasurer's
pick 'em
office,
up.
bring them here, and then we distribute the checks to the employees.
Okay,
And the payables checks, we pick up at the treasurer's office, we bring them here, and they hold them here in the safe. And tomorrow morning, Eileen Pusateri, who works for me, will come to me and say, can I send out all the checks? And then she mails,
okay, so,
assuming everything's approved.
and then you put postage on it, and mail them out.
Yes.
In terms of employees,
Are they signed?
the district has to authorize a person to be on the payroll before the township school treasurer is going to pay him. In other words, there's certain procedures within your district to put a person on the payroll.
We do that on a monthly basis, we're adjusting that monthly.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, here sits our, person, like you said, who hands out the checks, and he'd be the one we'd look to make sure that every check you hand out to a person is a person working for us. And the township on their end,
Well, I would assume that when the payroll is sent in, that somebody reviews it at least somewhat
Yeah.
to see that the persons listed there are in fact people that belong there.
sure,
I mean, you can't abrogate all of the responsibility to the
and
treasurer.
and we employ the superintendent who employs the business manager to take care of that for the board. And part of your audit, these check sheets, you're asking these type of questions on how the payroll's processed,
Mhm.
how the bills are paid,
Yes.
how the revenue is received that's at the township, you're taking care of at the township level, and you're asking questions about the revenue that we're receiving locally here.
Well, see, there I have a little bit of an advantage in that in terms of the bulk of the major revenues, they come through the treasurer's office, and we have third-party confirmation, and we do audit that virtually 100% in terms of the real estate taxes, the replacement taxes, the federal funds and state funds. So we know through ISB basically, who is the distributor or of these monies, there are reports that we get that says, okay, you got X number of dollars in state aid. I can go right to the treasurer's office and I should find those 24 payments, and then I should go to your district for your particular district and see 24 payments coming in here as well.
Yeah, because
So
they commingle all these schools, so you, at that end, at the treasurer's end, you wanna make sure each one of your districts gets the appropriate money.
Actually, they don't commingle it. They do account for them separately.
Well, they all come into the same
Oh, yes,
pot of money.
yes.
I'm sure they account for them
Yeah.
separately.
Yeah.
And that's what you're auditing at that level, to make sure that each one of the districts gets credit for the money that's supposed to go to
Yes.
them, and not get credit for money that's not supposed to go to them.
Yes.
Did we get did you ask for an extension, because we missed the October 15th cutoff? to
I'm
file?
sorry?
Did we have to get an extension this year because we didn't get it filed with the Intermediate Service Center by October 15th?
I thought it was,
No,
it was submitted
No, it was
October
filed.
13th.
It was filed on
The
time.
AFR
Yeah,
was filed.
So now we submit it before we see the report?
The board does not
Before we
approve the
approve.
audit.
Oh,
Yeah,
But
we
we
actually
don't?
filed it electronically when we prepared it, and we sent it down to ISB.
But that's the annual financial report, not
The
the
AFR,
audit.
yes, sir.
which
Two
is a
separate
different
things.
type of
Which is
document than.
Different from what you're asking.
It is a state document that they prescribe, which has a different kind of format,
An awkward format, if I
Huh?
recall. An awkward format, if I recall.
somewhat awkward.
Yeah.
somewhat awkward.
Okay, any other questions? Then if you could do me a favor, and when you respond back to the questions that were given to you, send it through Tim, and then Tim, if you can work with Kevin and get it out to the board, I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I will try to get that done this week so you could have it for your next meeting, and if there are any follow-ups, just let me know, and we'll make every attempt to get everybody happy.
Thank you.
Thank you
My
very much.
pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate it, thank you.
My pleasure.
Brad, I have a question. Can I ask?
For the
No,
audit?
for us,
We're gonna talk later about something.
about the audit, about this, but a conversation came out of here. So since this is our business meeting, Tim, you brought up that we have 4 policies, but we don't have a working document to reflect against, to see what our internal controls are, or to even have a system to review them. Is that something we would want to put on a further board meeting to say, as a board, is this something we would like to ask our administration to begin to develop? Do you think this is something that's worthwhile? I think I'm in favor of systems and checks, and, I mean, it's not urgent, but as a roadmap, it might behoove us to have something in place that we can reflect against. Because even with all these controls, we too could have an issue with fraud or something happening.
Well, I definitely was gonna suggest we put something for a future agenda that go talk about whether we have appropriate internal control documentation, or whether we're meeting our policy requirement on doing a review of the internal controls.
Yeah, I would say the board recommended a procedure manual is similar to an administrative procedure. I say if anything, the board, if they wanted to, could hire an auditing firm to do a separate audit on internal controls. But I don't think that the board wants to create the management procedures that we need to do for internal controls.
No, but I think the board would instruct or give direction to the administration that they may want to develop something to systematically, to have in place so that we do know what those internal controls are.
Right.
We can discuss it and see if the majority of the board wants the administration to do
Right,
that.
we're not telling you how to do it, but I think the board is saying that there is nothing in place and we don't know if there are internal controls, and we've been asking that for 2 years.
Well, there
Well,
are internal
that's been
controls in
presented
place.
to the board.
Tim presented that to the board.
As oral, but there's nothing that anybody, an outsider, could reflect against. It's written down.
No, he presented all the different, how you make purchases, how they get approved. He showed you all the written documents, the forms that staff has to fill
Tim
out.
said today it was an oral, though. It's not written down anywhere.
Right,
It's
so that we can have a
procedure.
discussion at a future meeting, and if the majority of the board thinks it's worth it for the administration to create the document, we can go forward with that discussion and potentially do that. But the way he says it is, a lot of these schools don't have this manual per se.
But this school likes a lot of documentation. We put 1,000 documents on the website because we like documentation, Mike.
Yeah,
Well,
we
I
put all our
definitely-
paid bills on the website every month. Every dime we spend, we put up.
Right, so, all right, I think we need to put down a future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hold on,
Appreciate
we
it.
have to go back to one thing.
I asked for any more questions.
Well, I'm gonna ask another one, because something he said's different than what I understood the policy says. The
it?
question was, we had you hold the filing the first year we were here because we weren't happy with the audit. Now we find out we submitted the audit report required by the state prior to us even seeing the audit document or approving it. So was the audit report that was provided to states, except for the format, substantially similar to the audit report that we saw?
The annual financial report that goes to the Illinois State Board of Education is in its own prescribed form.
Right, that I understand.
And we attach an opinion to it, which is specifically designed for the AFR. It is not the same opinion that you see in your audit report. They ask for information that is not even in an audit report per se that you see. But the reason that the AFR was submitted was to be on a timely basis with the state. We could have gotten an extension, but everything was done, the numbers were done. the audit was complete, the numbers we were in agreement with the numbers. We saw no reason to hold back the filing of the AFR beyond the October 15th date.
Okay, I asked, was that document substantially similar to the one we saw today, the numbers and its
Oh, no,
substance?
It's two separate
The number-
documents.
the-
I understand it's in a different format.
The numbers are the same.
That's what I'm
Are they in the
asking.
same format? No,
Okay,
but they are the same numbers.
okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.